There is something I have never said out loud to anybody, at least not in quite this way. Most mornings just after 7, I sit at a little plastic table outside a bakery in Tagaytay. The air is cool enough that I can see steam rising from my coffee. Jeepneys grumble past on the road. Somewhere behind the houses, a rooster keeps insisting the day started because he said so. Before I even sit down, Liza behind the counter puts one cup on the tray, black, no sugar, and points to the warm pandesal coming out of the oven. Rene, the tricycle driver across the street, raises two fingers from his seat. My neighbor's grandson pedals by and calls, "Morning, Mr. Dan." Nothing dramatic happens. Nobody applauds. But three people notice that I have entered the day. 9 years ago, I could go from Monday morning to Friday afternoon without hearing my own name spoken by another person. 9 years. That is how long I have lived in the Philippines, and I think I finally understand why so many lonely men come here and say, sometimes with embarrassment, that they feel seen again. It is not the reason people back home assume. It is not because every man finds romance. It is not because life becomes one long vacation. It is not because Filipinos exist to make foreigners feel important. That kind of thinking will get you hurt, and worse, it will stop you from seeing the people around you as people. The real answer is smaller than that. It happens in ordinary moments repeated until your life has shape again. My name is Daniel Mercer. Most people here call me Dan. I am 72 years old, born and raised outside Dayton, Ohio. I spent 38 years working in a plant that made precision components for aircraft hydraulic systems. I started on a milling machine and finished as a floor supervisor with 26 people reporting to me. I was never rich, but I was useful. If a machine started making the wrong sound, somebody came looking for me. If a shipment was late, my phone rang. If a new kid could not read a tolerance sheet, I pulled up a chair. For most of my life, being needed was so normal that I never understood it was holding me together. Then I retired at 62. The company gave me a watch, a sheet cake, and a framed photograph of the old production crew. On my first Monday without work, I woke at 5:10 out of habit. I shaved, made coffee, and stood in the kitchen wearing pressed jeans with nowhere to go. I remember the refrigerator humming. I remember a delivery truck backing up somewhere outside. I remember thinking, this is freedom. By 10 that morning, freedom felt very quiet. My marriage had been thinning out for years. There was no affair and no grand explosion. My wife Carol and I had simply become two careful people sharing a mortgage. Once I stopped working, we could no longer hide behind schedules. 18 months after my retirement, she told me she wanted a divorce. She said she did not hate me. Somehow that sentence hurt more than if she had. Our two children were grown. My daughter lived in North Carolina with a husband, three children, and a calendar that looked like air traffic control. My son was in Colorado and called every few weeks, usually while driving somewhere. Nobody had done anything cruel. That matters. Loneliness does not always arrive because someone abandons you. Sometimes every person has a reasonable explanation, and you are still eating canned soup over the sink because using a bowl feels like creating unnecessary dishes. I rented a one-bedroom apartment near Kettering after the house sold. It was clean, beige, and so well insulated I could not hear my neighbors. I tried to make retirement work the proper way. I joined a gym, volunteered at a food pantry, attended a church breakfast, and tried a senior bowling league. I met pleasant people, but nobody really knew anybody. I know, that sounds self-pitying. I had a pension. I had decent health. I had children who loved me in the busy, long-distance way adult children often do. Plenty of people had it worse. I repeated that to myself so often it became another way of saying I had no right to admit I was lonely. My days narrowed. Coffee at 6, news until 8, grocery store on Tuesday, laundry on Thursday, a burger at the same sports bar on Friday, where the bartender called me boss because he called every older man boss. If I stayed home for 3 days, nobody noticed. Once, during an ice storm, I slipped beside my car and bruised my hip badly enough that I spent 2 days moving between the couch and bathroom with a broom handle as a cane. I kept my phone beside me. It never rang. That was the first time I became frightened, not of dying exactly, but of disappearing in stages. You are 63, sitting in a beige apartment with an ice pack against your hip, and you suddenly understand that being independent can look a lot like being unobserved. Nobody knows what you ate. Nobody knows whether your curtains opened. Nobody knows you fell. You start wondering how many days would pass before someone realized you were missing. I tried everything I knew before I considered leaving the country. I looked at communities in Florida and Arizona. The nice ones cost more than my old mortgage. I visited my daughter for 6 weeks, thinking I might move closer. She was kind and tried hard, but her house already had 5 lives moving through it. I became a piece of furniture everyone worried about bumping into. I looked at part-time work, but every job either wanted a rotating schedule or involved standing on concrete for 8 hours. My knees had already done their share of that. The Philippines entered my life through a man named Walter, who had worked in quality control at the plant. We were not close friends. He had moved to Iloilo after retirement, and one Sunday night I found a video he had posted. He was sitting outside during a rainstorm, talking about the cost of groceries. Halfway through, a neighbor leaned over the fence and handed him a bowl covered with a plate. Walter laughed and said, "I don't know what this is yet, but apparently it's my dinner." I watched that part 3 times. Not the prices, not the palm trees, the bowl coming over the fence. That video sent me down a rabbit hole. I watched retirees talking about Manila traffic, visa extensions, hospital bills, brownouts, humidity, and ants that could find a sealed jar in a locked cabinet. I joined 2 expat forums and 3 Facebook groups. There were loud men in those groups who claimed everything was paradise, and bitter men who claimed every smile concealed a scheme. I learned to ignore both. I paid attention to ordinary people, men who showed their monthly budgets, couples who argued honestly about homesickness, widowers who talked about learning to eat rice for breakfast. They were not millionaires. Most had Social Security, a modest pension, or both. For 11 months, I researched. 11 months. I made spreadsheets. That was the supervisor in me. Rent, electricity, health insurance, visa fees, flights home, emergency cash. I spoke with an immigration consultant, had a medical exam, and gave my daughter copies of every document. Then I booked a furnished apartment for 3 months in Tagaytay because I wanted cooler weather and enough distance from Manila to breathe. I arrived on a wet afternoon with 2 suitcases and a blood pressure monitor. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Rain on warm concrete mixed with charcoal smoke and something sweet frying at a roadside stall. The second thing I noticed was noise. Dogs, engines, vendors, children, karaoke from a house I could not see. My apartment was on the 2nd floor of a cream-colored building behind a hardware store. It cost 18,000 pesos a month, about $360 at the time. The bedroom window faced a tangle of roofs and banana leaves. The shower had one temperature when it worked, and the kitchen counter was low enough to punish my back. The first night, I lay awake listening to rain hammer the metal awning and thought, "Daniel, you have made a spectacular mistake." The first month was not a rescue, it was work. I misunderstood coins, stood in the wrong lines, and followed directions based on landmarks that no longer existed. I smiled when I had not understood a word, and then walked confidently in the wrong direction. Once I poured sweet cream into my coffee thinking it was milk. I drank it anyway because pride is expensive, and coffee was already made. I also made the mistake many foreign men make. I assumed friendliness meant friendship. A man at a market called me his brother after 10 minutes and asked for a loan on the 11th. A woman online told me I had kind eyes, then developed 3 separate family emergencies before we ever met. I lost 12,000 pesos helping with a supposed hospital bill. Not enough to ruin me, but enough to embarrass me. I did not tell my children. For a while, I pulled back and told myself the cynics had been right. Then my landlord, Arturo, knocked on my door because he had not seen me leave for 2 days. I had a fever and a stomach infection. He drove me to a clinic, waited on a plastic chair, and argued with the pharmacy when they tried to give me the wrong quantity. His wife brought arroz caldo that evening, warm rice porridge with ginger chicken and a squeeze of calamansi. They did not ask for anything. They did not turn the moment into a speech about kindness. They simply noticed I was missing from the usual picture. That was the beginning, though I did not recognize it then. I extended my stay. I moved to a small ground floor house after 6 months. The rent was 22,000 pesos, roughly $440 then. There was a narrow porch, a rusted gate, and a mango tree that dropped fruit onto the roof with a bang loud enough to wake the dead. My neighbor Mila sold vegetables from a table near the road. She began setting aside the tomatoes that were firm enough for the sandwiches I made. Her grandson Paolo asked me to help with an English speech for school. The tricycle drivers learned where I lived. The woman at the pharmacy remembered my maintenance medicine before I said the name. These are small things. That is exactly the point. Back in Ohio, most of my interactions were transactions designed to be frictionless. Scan the groceries yourself. Order through an app. Leave the package at the door. Here, daily life had more friction, but friction meant contact. I had to ask. I had to wait. I had to explain. People asked me where I was going, whether I had eaten, why I was alone, when my children were visiting. At first, it felt intrusive. Americans are trained to treat privacy like a fence around dignity. Slowly, I realized some questions were not demands for information. They were little acts of acknowledgement. Have you eaten? Where have you been? We did not see you yesterday. Those words can sound ordinary. To a lonely man, they are evidence. I did date during my second year here. I should say that because otherwise people will fill in the blank. Her name was Grace, and she was a widowed school administrator near my age. We enjoyed each other's company for almost 2 years. It ended gently because she wanted to move closer to her daughter in Batangas, and I had begun putting down roots in Tagaytay. I was sad, but I did not collapse. That surprised me. By then, my life was no longer balanced on one person's attention. Romance had added something, but it had not created the foundation. That is one of the most important lessons I can offer. If you arrive starving for affection, the first person who feeds you can feel like destiny. Hunger makes poor judgment sound like hope. A man who has not heard a compliment in 5 years is easy to flatter. A man who has nobody to call is easy to isolate. The Philippines does not remove that danger. In some ways, it increases it. You must build a whole life, not attach yourself to the first person who makes you feel visible. My whole life here grew through routine. I started walking the same route each morning. I bought bread at the same bakery. I joined a small group that cleaned litter from the road twice a month. When Arturo needed shelves for a storage room, I helped him measure and mount them. When Paolo struggled with fractions, I drew machine parts on graph paper and showed him why a 16th of an inch mattered. Later, a local repair shop owner named Ben asked whether I could look at the way he organized jobs. I helped him make a simple board with columns for waiting, parts ordered, repair, and pickup. It was the most basic production system imaginable. He treated it like I had handed him fire. For the first time since retirement, somebody came looking for me because I knew how to do something. That mattered more than being called handsome. It mattered more than being told I was rich, which I was not. It mattered more than the flattering version of myself I could have purchased if I had wanted to. I was useful again, but differently. Nobody reported to me. I did not have a badge or a title. I had time, patience, and a few things I had learned the hard way. There were costs, too. I missed my mother's funeral after a storm canceled my flight and watched the service through a phone on my daughter's kitchen counter. I have had dengue fever, waited endlessly for paperwork, and sat through brownouts with a battery fan pointed at my face. Some friendships disappeared when money entered the conversation. Others faded when expats moved away or died. And yes, there are days when I am still lonely. Moving countries does not cure the human condition. It changes the conditions around your humanity. The difference is that loneliness here rarely stays invisible for long. If I miss my morning coffee, Lisa asks the next day where I was. If my porch light stays off, Mila sends Paolo to check the gate. On my 70th birthday, I expected 6 people for lunch, and 23 arrived. Someone brought pancit for long life. Someone else brought a chocolate cake with my name misspelled Dan. Children I barely knew sang louder than everyone. I looked around at plastic chairs borrowed from 3 houses and had to step into the kitchen because I could not trust my face. 23 people. In Ohio, I had once spent my birthday eating a burger at the bar, while a television above me showed a baseball game with the sound off. But I want to be careful here. I am not saying Filipino communities are magical or that everyone will adopt you. Belonging is not a service included with your rent. I showed up for 9 years. I attended wakes even when I did not know what to say. I contributed to food without trying to become the hero. I learned enough Tagalog to greet people, apologize, and understand when I was the subject of a joke. I stopped comparing every inconvenience to America. I learned that generosity has to move in both directions, and that saying no respectfully is part of any honest relationship. I also learned not to confuse being noticed with being admired. Sometimes being seen means Mila tells me I am getting too thin. Sometimes it means Arturo says I was rude to a delivery driver. Sometimes Paolo, now a young man, tells me my advice is outdated. Real community does not keep your ego comfortable. It gives you a place where your absence and your behavior both matter. My daughter visited 3 years ago. On her second morning, we walked to the bakery. Liza greeted me before we reached the counter. Renee called out that I was late. A boy from the repair shop stopped to ask if I could check a diagram later. My daughter watched all of this, then said, "Dad, everybody knows you." I laughed, but that evening she found me on the porch and apologized. She said she had thought I moved because I was running away from the family. I told her maybe part of me had been. Not from them exactly, from the version of myself who sat waiting for them to have room in their lives. I had expected my children to replace the purpose that work and marriage had given me. That was too much weight to put on them. Coming here forced me to build days that did not depend on a phone call from home. Our relationship improved after that. We speak every Sunday now. Not because she feels she has to check whether I'm alive, but because we have things to tell each other. I send photographs of Paolo's new baby. She tells me about my granddaughter applying to colleges. I am part of her life without standing in the doorway asking to be let in. So why do lonely men finally feel seen here? After 9 years, this is my answer. Because life in many parts of the Philippines is still conducted face to face. Because routines are visible. Because people notice patterns and eventually you become part of one. Because age does not automatically make a man irrelevant. Because skills that seemed obsolete can still help somebody. Because a question as simple as, "Have you eaten?" can reach a place that has gone quiet inside you. But you must participate. You must learn names. You must return kindness without turning every relationship into a debt. You must protect your finances without hardening your heart. You must accept that you are a guest, not the main character in everybody else's country. Most of all, you must stay long enough for recognition to become trust. This morning, rain began while I was at the bakery. It came down hard, bouncing off the road and blowing under the awning. Liza moved my coffee farther from the edge without asking. Renee pulled his tricycle closer and shouted that he would take me home when I was ready. Paolo's little daughter appeared beside the vegetable stand in yellow boots, stamping in a puddle while her grandmother pretended to scold her. I sat there with warm bread in my hand and listened to the roof rattle. Nobody was performing a grand act of love. Nobody was rescuing me. I was simply present in a place where my presence had become familiar. Then Liza looked at my empty cup and said, "Another one, Mr. Dan?" She already knew the answer.